Hello, Engineering Management 500, and hi, Professor Gillis. Today I'm going to be discussing some key points from two Greenboard presentations. The first one on the emerging work of managers by C. Kuiper Holland, and the second on Business 2010 by Ian Pearson and Michael Lyons. A brief overview. These are the topics that I'm planning on reviewing today. Some of them are addressed quite clearly by both Greenboards, while other ones are more specific to one or the other. The first I'll be addressing is the role of the internet, and then I'll move on addressing talent and diversity, then into managing volatility, virtual companies. I'll touch on some comments on future corporate structure and cooperatives, and finish off with the concept of transitioning to the care economy. Let's start off with the role of the internet, which is covered quite a bit in the C.K. Prahalad Greenboard. It addresses the general shift of power to the customer. We've already seen that with consumers specifically, that they're no longer geographically limited. The average consumer is no longer bound by the brick and mortar stores that they're able to reach within a certain amount of time. We're seeing, because of that, a lot of both small and what I'd call big box store failures, things like Sears, Toys R Us, etc., but also local businesses. Your local, even clothing stores, things that aren't these big corporate chains. They're getting pushed out, and I think that occurred first with the big companies that are able to keep costs down, moving in, but at the same time, they're getting hit a lot harder now with the online marketplace. But I think the interesting part of this is that businesses are no longer geographically limited either. So if you have a small business is no longer located to just or confined within its specific area. It's able to branch out, and a small mom and pop company from middle of nowhere Montana could actually have a thriving business and be selling all across the nation or all across the world. In addition, he addresses that personalized products have progressively increased. I think that's true. You can really look as far as going to the earlier days of the internet, companies like Dell Computers, being able to provide a personalized custom-built computer efficiently and effectively. And then we kind of moved into more things. I look at personalized engraving of iPods, things like that in the early 2000s, and moving up to some highly sophisticated intelligence type of software like Netflix recommendations or highly personalized ads. I think it's really fascinating that you can Google something or be on some website, and the next one you go to, all of a sudden you see an ad for the same thing. It's a little bit creepy, and I think that it's a fine line to walk as far as addressing people's interests and meeting people's interests, but at the same time not being overly intrusive. And I think right now some of these ads tend to be too intrusive. Additionally, with the role of the internet, I think it's becoming very apparent that most businesses need to develop a web presence early, and a lot of companies will fail if they don't. Toys R Us being an example, getting late into e-commerce, they really struggled to catch up. And then the use of collaboration software in the workplace, I think, is also growing quite a bit. You'll see things like Slack and Microsoft Teams coming into play. I think there's both benefits and setbacks. I think there's a significant challenge of information overload with this type of technology that I think there's going to be some interesting changes with it in the future. Talent. Both of the Greenboards really address this topic. Pearson and Lyons say that it's important to tap into the creativity of all their people. Trust and effective responding is important. Prahalad states that new talent is the body politic. Seniority, authority, and power must give way to talent management. I think this is true. The old school um, sort of bossing people around versus managing and enabling people um, is really starting to change. And Pearson and Lyons then address, they talk about enabling instead of controlling. I think, that speaks to a lot of everything that we've been reading in this class, past, assignments, and I think it's really starting to show in the way that corporate culture has changed. Diversity. I found it really interesting that the concept of too much uniform process can pose issues from both functional and cultural perspectives. I think there's some interesting parallels with diversity and some statements that are made in Drucker with the 20th to 21st century challenges. Drucker really talks about not focusing as much on these ultra process based things, these industry things, and kind of enabling people to be able to do what they want to do in their way. And utilizing that type of motivation to get things done. Everybody is different, everyone is diverse, not just globally, but locally within an office. And it's about embracing that diversity, I think, is what's going to be the future. In addition, Drucker and Prahalad both sort of address these value systems, and that values don't change. And instead of trying to force that square peg into a round hole, it just further supports that there's a need to respect and understand and work with diversity. Managing volatility, I think we can all agree that the market is changing faster than it has in the past, and it is very important to be able to adapt. I've found that, along the lines of discussing freelance and other types of employment in these green boards, I've seen that subcontracting or just contract employees in general is becoming a big thing, and I think it's only increasing. Um, I'm finding that a lot of companies now will only hire new engineers specifically as contract hires. Others don't, but I think it's going to increase. There's a lot of proof that it reduces costs. However, I think it'll be interesting to see how it affects culture and employee retention over time, and also knowledge retention. Companies will need to scale up and down quickly, which the uh, contract hires help to support that. Flexible, adaptive staff, I think, is also going to be important in finding how to repurpose staff. I think companies need to continue to diversify in a way to avoid really taking a dive due to a dip in a certain market. For example, my employer, Roush, has diversified out of automotive. They're now in aerospace, entertainment, aviation, and so on. So, if one tanks, if one doesn't do well, the other ones can still keep things afloat. Um, and lastly, talent retention. I touched on this just a little while ago, but with this volatility, trying to retain the best talent, I believe, is going to become a focus and will be a major challenge. Um, Virtual companies, I think this is something that's still kind of progressing, and it's interesting that they talk about it. And you can look at some things today that are a little less management based, kind of individual people can jump in and be a part of the game quickly. Things like Uber, you have Lime, these scooter services, Grubhub. I think you're seeing kind of the bare base foundation level of some of these concepts. People can just jump in and contribute. But I think we're far away from that full-blown virtual company. Individuals jumping around in different roles, kind of a task-based economy versus these separate corporations. I think we have a long way to go. So building on that, Prahalad and Pearson and Lyons all talk about kind of future corporate structure, future management challenges, and I think it's definitely true, and I would agree that administrators and managers will not be needed in their traditional form, and intellectual leadership, administrative leadership, those type of things. Intellectual leadership is going to be the focus. The administration side will become more automated. And as I said, most people will be freelance. I think that is going to be slower to come, but I think that that type of labor market and labor dynamic will be interesting, where people will be able to move where they would be best utilized. Whether that continues to work within like I say, a large company, people move around more, or if it's completely free for all, I think that that'll be an interesting challenge. But kind of excited to see what comes in the next few decades with that. And then along those lines, Lyons and Pearson talk about these global knowledge guilds. I think that's very interesting. Just to see how that'll work. Will they be kind of shopping centers for certain types of talent, or will things like you look at Monster.com or ZipRecruiter, will those websites kind of be that? Those businesses, will they morph into something like that, where I have a task that I need to get done, I need a person to work for just 2 weeks? How that will end up. And lastly, I think the last thing that's addressed is this care economy. I feel like it's a little bit unrealistic at this point. And even some of the things that are addressed about the care economy and by Pearson and Lyons, these teachers and physicians, things like that being the human factor. I think sometimes AI can make that obsolete. You could kind of have an AI doctor looking at your symptoms, kind of an advanced version of WebMD, except they wouldn't tell you you have cancer no matter what your symptoms are. So interesting to see kind of where that comes, and does this care economy really become the employment future, or can it be obsolete too? And then I think the last part of it too is, does a sole care economy, especially as it develops, can it jeopardize the security and stability of nations? Specifically looking at developed economies, which are further along and may move into a care economy sooner. How does that loss of an industrial or manufacturing background versus other countries play out, especially in a time of war or conflict, if that were to occur? So in conclusion, I think a lot of the things that are addressed in these green boards are pretty true, and they're coming true in some ways. I think some other ones haven't, and they're going to take a long time. And I think it's very difficult to make a call about whether or not they will happen. But I think they're all exciting to look at, and in the next few decades, I think things will continue to change. So it's very fascinating. I think that really going back to Drucker and how he talks about some of the new challenges in the 21st century, these green boards really touch on a lot of the same topics or elaborate on them. So as I said, it'll be interesting. Thank you very much, and have a good weekend.